Коллеги, доброе утро. Ми уже через пару минут будемо розпочинати нашу конференцію. Просто хочу попередити, що один виступ в першій сесії буде німецькою мовою. Хто потребує перекладу, будь ласка, візьміть, отам от є навушники, щоб потім ми вже не вставали, а ми зачекаємо 2-3 хвилинки, щоб ви взяли всі навушники. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we'll start our conference in a couple of minutes, and one presentation will be in German language, and I would like to invite you to take ear hearing just if you need translation into English. Thank you very much.
She's spending so much her resources fighting the flu, so that she will be enough with the second presentation.
Okay.
So I'm her boss.
Name's Pavlo. I believe you've seen my input in this strategy of Vladimir. This 37% of GDP.
I have.
Yeah.
And I met Leszek.
I talked to her, yes.
Yeah. So I met Leszek.
Oh, you've met Leszek.
Yes,
okay.
yeah. And
Not
I've read
Ivan.
your reports.
You've read the report. You're familiar with that.
Yeah. Are they doing anything with it? No?
Partially. I'll tell some. That's actually what I wanted to speak about. So let's.
So you were here?
I'm here.
GIZ stands for?
For German International Development.
Okay.
But I'm
Are you a finance man?
finance man.
Public finance?
Public finance.
Okay.
Finance man. But it was work for Sheets, I work for the office from the Prime Minister in Hessen.
Hessen, yes,
Do you
yes.
know Hessen?
I know Hessen. Yes.
One of the part from Germany.
Are you moderating? So this is...
I'm not here.
You're here?
I'm not here. I'm here, but it's in the same name. I'm Olena. Okay.
Olena. Good. Thank you.
Okay, I think we will start.
Is the minister here?
Minister will arrive this later. In half an hour. But we will start, and then once he arrives, we will
So who are you going to start with?
Mr. Willem will start. We will have this introductory
Right.
for 5 minutes.
Right.
5 minutes with the president.
Yes.
Then Willem
And then you will start this one.
I think after his presentation.
Okay.
We'll see. Maybe if he's still not here, then we will.
Just speak from here, sitting down. Is that the idea?
I think it would be better if we do here. But if it is not convenient, the microphone is here. It's up to
Or also German Portrait.
Translation between German and English.
possible to switch.
Or just here, I mean, so it will be that the minister okay, so we have taken away. So the moderator. So you have a seat there because I'm not joining. I'm really giving it up.
Long?
I know, I've been working in Greece.
Okay.
The special guest.
Шановні пани та панове, прошу займати свої місця. Ми нарешті починаємо. Мене звуть Олена Білан.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Please, let's start. My name is Olena Bilan. I'm the advisor to the Dragon Capital, and together with the sponsors today, I'm glad to announce the discussion of this event, and hopefully it will transfer in a quality discussion of how to reduce public expenditures in Ukraine, how to increase the efficiency of this, and how we can do this. I've already seen some early steps made by the government in respect of increasing the efficiency of expenditures, and Mr. Prime Minister already issued an order to the land ministries to hold public consultations on how to improve the expenditure performance of each ministry. And it is really of importance that we have switched for the second stage of the discussion, and I'm glad to announce this conference open. And please welcome our first speaker, Mrs. Daniela Bergelt, Head of Economic Cooperation in the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Ukraine. Please be ready to switch between languages because we have 3 work languages today. So, Ms. Bergel, welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very honored to welcome you today on behalf of the German Embassy. Germany and Great Britain jointly support the Ministry of Finance in its reform efforts on budget policy, tax and customs, external financial control and reform communication through the joint project Public Finance Management Reform implemented by GIZ. It is our common goal to establish European standards of transparency, performance and accountability for the PFM system in Ukraine. Public finance management is a key factor to ensure macroeconomic stability and sustainability. A realistic and transparent budget provides the basis for economic development of any country. It contributes to an efficient and competitive economic growth. That is why proper public expenditure management and result-oriented budgeting plays such an essential role, not only for a Minister of Finance or Minister of Economy, but in fact for every citizen. A transparent and comprehensible budget will help to regain confidence in the government and strengthen democracy. The Parliament, the government, the counting chamber and the civil society have to cooperate very closely to achieve this target. An open discussion about the budget, like this conference today, is a sign of democratization and shows the demand on transparency and delivery of high-quality public services. The improvement of the program-based budgeting in Ukraine, the introduction of medium-term budget planning, and the improvement of public spending efficiency are essential for ensuring sustainability and efficiency of the public finance system. Program-based budgeting is an efficient and transparent tool to match political objectives with the actions of the public institutions and the resources being available to implement a certain policy. The aim is to have a budget that reflects the political priorities as defined by the government. This will help to improve accountability, ensure efficient public service delivery in such important life areas like education and healthcare, about which we will hear later on today a bit more. I want to thank all participants and those who brought this conference into being, especially to the Ministry of Finance, the Reanimation Package of Reforms, the Center for Economic Strategy, the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting, and of course GIZ. I wish all of us a lively and fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Дякую, Mrs. Bergelt.
Thank you, Ms. Bergelt. I'd like now to present our participants of the first panel today. We are still waiting for the Minister of Finance. He is to come here if a bit later, and we will have to make a snap inclusion of his speech whenever he comes. And now we start the first panel discussion. Please welcome Mr. Günther Weiland, expert of GIZ and an expert in public finance and control. Then we are going to hear from Ms. Ruth Richardson, the ex-Minister of Finance of New Zealand, back in 1993. She's known to be the key architect of the fiscal reform in the New Zealand economic environment. Then we're going to hear from Guli Wyszynski, Director of the Center for Economic Strategy and RPR expert, who will speak on the results of his survey. And then we are going to have Pavlo Kuchta, Deputy Head of the Group of Councillors with the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. And now I'd like to invite Günther Weiland to present his speech. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm very glad to present here the German experience of performance-based budgeting. And generally speaking, the key elements of programmatic approach, so that we are going to present 3 examples from our Hessen experience from 2016. I will start with some key components. The key components in the lands of Hessen include a wide-scale introduction of PBB in all administrations and public authorities. And for that purpose, we have a system of objectives stemming from the supreme political priorities. And these objectives are translated way down to each budget spending entity. Key budget spending entities develop the budgeting programs aimed at implementation of legislatively provided priorities, and they also identify performance and quality indicators. The PBB is the backbone of this matter. Thanks to the Parliament, in the scope of its budgeting sovereignty, is capable of identifying those results that must be reached using the budget available. Expenditures and revenues are tied to budget programs, and they also have KPIs and other performance and financial efficiency indicators. This is done so that the results of implementations be comparable, and that's where the Parliament is able to monitor on an annual basis the proper implementation of political economic objectives. The tasks of executive authorities is in implementation of political objectives in the scope of their decentralized budget responsibilities. By approving such objectives, the legislature charts ways forward, and the public management is also executed through contracts executed at all levels, and these contracts represent agreements between the legislature and the executive as to the task to be completed and performed. Based on that, each budget spending entity uses its own responsibility to manage public funds in the scope of political priorities established. Another specific tool includes a systemic controlling of the results based on KPIs, and this provides possibilities to analyze the progress towards budget implementation and prospects of budgeting for the coming period. Let us see how it looks in detail.
It is necessary for the system of objectives to have clear political goals, for example, decline of crime, and it has to be set at the highest level by the high professional goals, for example, strengthening the police presence on the Hesse streets or improving the participation of youth. And such goals set the basis for line ministries to set up their budget programs that they would recommend to the policymakers and politicians when they are working on their budgeting process. While the budget code is being approved, the set of budget programs are being reviewed, and the MPs, according to their priorities, will set that in the budget law. After the political legitimization of budget programs and expenditures, the line ministers receive budget for each of their system goals. You can see that here. That means that MPs are setting political goals, and then the executive authority, the ministries, specify those goals in accordance with the priorities. I will explain it later using specific examples. After that, the spending units will have to, within their budgets, will have to develop their own budget programs that should be implemented according to their own scope of authority. And at the end of the year, if the budget funding is not used, they can be reallocated for the future years. And for the state authorities to maintain this process, the federal land government will have to receive a systematic comprehensive information, and such information becomes available within the government controlling, which is based on the common value system and the software that is used for the enterprise management. And the differentiated approach is used according to the functional responsibilities of different levels. At the end of the budget year, there is the check of the goals that have been identified at the beginning of the budget year. For example, whether the crime incidents have really gone down. And to summarize, the main process of the budget, performance-based budgeting, is consistent of 4 steps. First of all, setting the goal system, which is in Germany includes coalition agreement, which is an agreement signed by the strongest political fractions in the parliament. And then, as you can see, the second step, you can see on the step, development of budget programs and their subordination to the system of goals. And it's very important to have strategic goal that is outlined in the coalition agreement, and then budget programs, secondly, and thirdly, developing indicators, performance indicators for specific budget programs, and then subordination to the budget programs. And the third part of my presentation will focus on performance indicators, which is the core of the performance-based budgeting. What is the goal of the performance indicators? Together with the goals, performance indicators are established to clarify the progress of the goals achievement, and they're used to compare the targets with the actual results, because those indicators reflect the results and the progress and dynamic. And it's important, the big mistake that we have made in Germany, we need to look that one good indicator can be better than 10 poor indicators. And the performance indicators are always looked at the timeline, because only then they can reflect the true progress. And for each budget program, we establish at least one performance indicator with the focus on a goal, and then another indicator with regards to finance, or the effective use of finance. Overall, the number of performance indicators should be limited to maximum 5 for each budget program. And the result indicators should always be considered in the framework of value for money. And I would like to present to you 3 specific examples that we have done in our Hesse budget. First of all, it's the Ministry of Infrastructure and Transportation, then Ministry of Healthcare, and then the Ministry of Education. Let's start with the Ministry of Transportation. And in the beginning of this example, we would like to look at the need of the safety provisions. That means that those who establish unsafe conditions in the transportation network, they need to establish the safety precautions. If you transfer it to the traffic rules, that means that the government will need to periodically do the inspections of the safety of traffic. If the government is not doing this, there will be implications and injuries as a result of the poor road condition, and the citizens will have the right to appeal and get the compensations from the government. And then they can check whether the government have done the appropriate repair works on the roads. And how the performance indicators for this goal may look like. The goal is to ensure safe and effective transportation and telecommunication infrastructure in line with the EU standards to ensure economic growth and safe traffic. This is a specific goal that is reflected in our budget. And a performance indicator that could be used would be the number of requests for reimbursement of the accidents or the injuries that have been experienced because of the poor road condition. And I would like to show whether this performance indicator is straightforward or it can be interpreted differently. And it's important because when there is a complaint or a claim submitted, then the court can appeal that, and we need to make sure that the performance indicator that we are using are straightforward. And first indicator is the number of claims submitted to the court for the compensation, and we need to ensure that there should be lawful claims and justified claims. And the first question that we have asked in Germany was whether we can use this performance indicator to measure how the progress is achieved in time. And so a claim, if people are constantly appealing to court because the government is not maintaining their roads in a safe condition, that means that something is going wrong. And in this way, we can see whether we are achieving this political goal. Next question, whether the labor costs are in line with the benefits, and we need to ensure that the information collected to measure this indicator is not causing too much labor costs. And we are surveying all the agencies involved in information collection. We can also survey the general public, but why are we not using this indicator? Because that would mean a lot of labor costs. And we can, of course, do a lot of surveys and opinion polls, and we will get a good statistics. But labor costs would be excessive compared to the use of the information. And in Ukraine, we have seen such examples when indicators are used from the surveying the general public, and it's a very labor-intensive process. And then we need to also ensure that indicators should be useful only in time, and that means we need to monitor those indicators within 4 or 5 years to see how the dynamics is developing. And another important point, which is performance indicators should be measurable. And in Germany, we made this mistake that we have come up with too many indicators for each budget program. So I recommend 4 or 5 at most. And it's important for those indicators to be measurable. For example, how we need to ensure the access to all roads. And how do you measure that? It's important to have the number, the numerous indicators. So the number of claims is a good indicator to check the effectiveness of budget programs. Let's move to the education. You see our coalition agreement with the federal Hesse land, and that was done for the 2014-2019 period of the parliament, and this is the current coalition agreement. And we have quite an unusual situation in Hesse because for the first time we have joined the Conservative Party with the Green Party. And the next year will show whether this coalition would be possible at the federal level. But we are the first to have such a coalition. So we open this coalition agreement and we see that the factions agreed for the long term, which is 110 pages of this coalition agreement, and it covers all political goals that our coalition is trying to pursue. And based on this coalition agreement, I found this example. The educational policy in Germany is one of the most important tasks, and the medium-sized enterprises up to $500 million per year is the core of German economy, and most of the jobs is actually with those medium-sized companies. Almost 68% of all employed age population is working there. So they're not working on Volkswagen or Siemens. They're working. Most population are working on the mid-sized businesses, and most of those companies are leaders on their markets, global markets. So a large share of employees require good education. And that is also included in the federal policy and in the coalition agreement. So it says good education for children and youth has a decisive importance for the further participation in the society. And education is the core task for the future. And we have a goal to bring every child to the best success in education. And both Germany and Ukraine have that strategic planning kind of vaguely defined. And it's very difficult to set more specific goals. So to do that is specified further, and we have the coalition agreement saying more specifically that we want to have all school pupils to have a secondary education diploma. How is this goal reflected in the coalition agreement and in our budget? And they're not theoretical examples. It's a very specific example. This is how it is outlined in our budget. The goal of the Ministry of Education looks as follows. In Hesse, the educational policy has a high priority. So the educational policy is responsible for creating conditions for all children and young people to develop their competencies and skills for the active participation in the society and economy. And for that, we will continue the project Education and Employment in School. And we see how the strategic goal is specified at the sectoral goal. And the next strategic goal for the children to receive a secondary education degree, recognized in the whole of Federal Republic, we set the programs, and we can see how education support program is reflected in primary, secondary, and high schools. And we see how this is reflected in our plan. We have a top goal, ensuring high-quality education, And then in our Hesse budget, we have almost 286 million euros. How it is reflected in the secondary schools. The budget is allocated almost 281 million euro for this year. And you see the description of our budget plan. They're all established and approved by the parliament. For that, we need the description or the budget passport of the budget programs. And you see how they look like on this slide and how they're connected to political goals and how the indicators are reflected in the budget plan. We can see the 4 or 5 years timeline, and the share of students with the secondary school education should be increased from 22 to 26%, and you see the actual indicators that can be measured. And even 2013, 22% of school children graduated secondary schools. And this indicator should go up to 26%. And we have some problems with demographics. In Germany, the number of children is going down, but we are not reducing the budget for education because we want to improve the education for our children, and we will continue investing funds into education for children to get good secondary education. One other indicator, if people get some employment, jobs, or internship, it's a good indicator, and how those 23,000 children will begin their professional life. But measuring this indicator would mean a lot of labor costs. So we decided to decline this indicator. And the last example, healthcare.
Here, the coalition agreement states the objective in the area of public health protection that concerns establishment of a reliable prevention system and improved access to all quality services in public health protection with a substantial element of support in the livelihood of the public. As you see, this is not really very specific. It's a political objective. And we have the Ministry for Social Policy in charge of public health protection. So the ministry further specifies the objective of why prevention measures are necessary and why they need to be improved. And because of that, we have a range of budget programs, targeted programs. You can see on this slide the program on public health support with a budget of 839 million euro. And on the next slide, we will see on the next slide, you will be able to see again the performance indicators and the dynamics proper to these indicators. And you will see it within the 5-year span. And we can trace the positive or negative dynamics. Let's take 6.2.1 point on the provision of possibilities of preventive medical examinations and early diagnostics of health disorders in newborns and junior children. It specifically envisages improving the involvement of maternity health clinics up to 95%, and it also includes measures on better medical examination of newborns. It clearly states that we want to monitor speech and hearing development of such kids, particularly those of 4 and 4.5 years of age. And this really connects to certain political objectives. So what is our experience in PBB of this area? We went away from the cameral system for quite some years, and we clearly say in favor of the PBB method, because using this method we can clearly see how much money we are spending, and it is also a possibility for us to clearly answer the question of what we want to achieve. The Parliament clearly implements a specific philosophy of not just spending money, but doing it on purpose to attain specific objectives. And they have parliamentary hearings to track the progress. And this opens up possibilities of new dialogues as to new objectives to be established. We have recently introduced the interim review of objectives throughout the year to see what mistakes have been made, what can be improved. All the parties in our parliament, they stood for PBB implementation, and our accounting office supported this effort. This Chief Financial Audit Authority was supportive and is supportive of it, and actually they have become champions of this cause. Together with the Parliament, the Audit Office spearheaded this move. At the beginning, we have too many budget programs and related KPIs designed. We had initially more than 700 budget programs. And with just 3 indicators, key performance indicators, we ended up with an avalanche of indicators, very hard to keep transparent. Because of that, we decided to switch to just mandatory 5 indicators. We have 2 mandatory ones, like the attaining of the goal and financial performance. And so that way we were able to reduce the number of our programs, budget programs, from 7 to just 500. And I can tell you that PBB will not bring more revenues to the national budget, nor will it help you to overcome any substantial financial crisis. But nevertheless, it makes a valuable tool to properly implement political objectives in each nation. Thank you for your attention.
Richardson, please, can you share your experience and teach us something?
Well, thank you very much for your invitation to come here to the Ukraine, and I feel immediately at home here in Kiev. Why? Because this is the place famous for revolutions. Right? I stand here representing a revolution in the conduct of public finance. And that revolution did not occur in 2014, it occurred in 1994. Let me tell you the story. Go back to 1989. 1989 was a vintage year. It was the fall of the Soviet Union, the Berlin Wall came down, the internet was created, and New Zealand passed the Public Finance Act. It's right up there with all of those other groundbreaking reforms for public finance. And I'll tell you why that revolution in the public policy framework, not just of fiscal policy, but comprehensive public and private settings in New Zealand, has been so important. I became the Minister of Finance in 1990. Because the Public Finance Act had been passed in 1989, in 2 years, I'm talking about fast and deep reform. In 2 years, the New Zealand public accounts were produced in accrual form, flows and stocks, assets and liabilities. In 2 years, we went from budgeting in inputs to outputs. And by 1992, I was the first Minister of Finance in the world that was able to produce the financial statements of the Government of New Zealand in generally accepted accounting form. They weren't very good accounts, but at least the figures were credible, the information was transparent, and we had put very, very different rules, game-changing rules into place. Let me tell you what happened next. This is a story about what real reform looks like. I've met 2 politicians since I've been in the Ukraine, your Minister of Finance and your Prime Minister. President, I've eaten his chocolate. Okay? And when I met the Prime Minister, he said, "We know what to do. But Mr. Prime Minister, you haven't done it." It's not knowing what to do, it's the will to act on it. And New Zealand faced, as Ukraine does now, a fiscal crisis of such proportions, we were forced to think very, very differently and radically about the rules of the game. As I say, not just for the conduct of public finance, the conduct of monetary policy, the labour market, open and competitive markets, no subsidies for agriculture, radical change to the tax regime, broad-based low rate, and introducing performance management reform into the public sector. These were very, very different rules. This is what radical reform has been able to achieve. Just let me read from the latest release that comes from looking at New Zealand's fiscal position, because we just don't have great figures. We have a strategic approach to the conduct of public finance. All budgeting is open. Before the budget is produced, a budget policy statement must be released, like a company thinking about its strategy. The budget is then the action on that strategy, and then we have comprehensive updates. It's a very strategic approach to fiscal policy. Why? Because we know that we can't achieve the things all politicians say they want, which is a dynamic economy, growth, foreign investment, confidence in the economy, great living standards. You cannot do that if it is not anchored to high quality fiscal policy. So I'm not going to talk about the numbers, although I'm very proud of the numbers. New Zealand's public debt is heading to 20% of GDP. We have got balanced books and surpluses as far as the eye can see. Public spending is heading towards about 30% of GDP. But more importantly, we have got a setting for fiscal policy that is complementary to the overall vision and ambition of the nation. And let me tell you how that ties in. So I'm reading from, if you go onto the website of the New Zealand Treasury, you've got a treasure trove of how the modern conduct of public finance should look like. We set the gold standards. I'll talk to you about my Fiscal Responsibility Act, which set the rules for the conduct of public finance. but it is in a much broader setting. So just let me read from some of the documentation. An efficient, effective and innovative state sector is critical to achieving higher standards of living for New Zealanders. Also, maintaining the level of trust New Zealanders have in the integrity of the government financial systems is fundamental to our democracy. I spoke to 100 young people out of Kiev yesterday. I said, "Do you trust your politics?" No, that was their answer, not mine. Do you think government is relevant to your lives? No. Do you think that there is the dynamic in the Ukraine that would make you want to stay here, study here, innovate here, create your living here? No. That is a scandal. That cannot be the future that Ukraine chooses for itself. That cannot be why you had a revolution, only to end with business as usual. So the reform of public finance is about a very different future to be seized for you. Let me look further at this document. Here are the broad principles. New Zealand's public sector management system has focused on promoting public sector performance. This performance management approach emphasises, among other things, clear objectives and clear lines of responsibility. So I can bring you the document from any Department of State in New Zealand. Here are the outputs. This is the cost. This is the quality. This is the accountability. And you, the official, are accountable to me, the minister, for delivering on those objectives. There are no jobs for life. We halved the size of the public sector. It's no use talking about a more efficient public sector doing dumb things more efficiently. You have to understand what are the things only the state can do. The state's job is to protect, to have the framework, the rule of law, to ensure that you have uncorrupt systems, to have a regulatory regime that encourages competition, where business face markets, not ministers. That is what the core state should be about. And then, having decided what is the role of the state, of course you want a modern and accountable performance management system. So we, in parallel, did not just public finance reform, we did labour market reform in the state sector. Because if I've got a high quality framework, and I saw that from Hessen, but I have old school public servants who, if they do a good job, a bad job, or a dreadful job, it doesn't matter, and they're not accountable for that, then what's the point? If you're serious about the reform, you have to have the coherence. All of the public sector, its labour market practices, its financial accountability, should be about discharging the modern, efficient role of the state that you choose. And this is not just advocacy of the high-quality conduct of public finances for its own sake. New Zealand went from being a highly indebted country, highly protected, uncompetitive, with a standard of living that was being propped up by borrowing. That is why the revolution, our Berlin Wall, fell in terms of the reform of the whole dynamic of our economy. So just let me finish, having put it in its framework, by telling you what it was like to be a Minister of Finance at that time. I was 39. My country had never balanced its books in my adult lifetime, and I was there to make a revolution. I was extremely fortunate I had the tools of the Public Finance Act, so high quality reporting, and I was determined in my 3 years in office that we would write new rules of the game. So when I left, forever the conduct of public finance would be responsible. And that's exactly what happened. So I'm a lawyer by training, not an economist. And I determined that we should, and this was pioneering as well, that we should write a code of fiscal responsibility. And the rules are, number one, we needed to reduce total public debt to prudent levels so as to provide a buffer against future adversity. I come from the South Island of New Zealand. We had a massive series of earthquakes in 2010 and 2011 at a cost of $40 billion, New Zealand dollars. The only reason that we were able to cope with that shock was because public debt levels had been reduced to a prudent basis, and we could deal with that shock to the system. The second principle is once prudent levels have been achieved, then over the cycle we need to ensure that we have surpluses. As I say, debt is now reduced to 20% of GDP, and we have surpluses. So they listened to the rules worked. We then said that the overall worth of the state, and remember we budget in accrual terms, so we know what the assets are, we know what the liabilities are, we know what the contingencies are. We publish investment statements. And so the third rule is that the net worth should be achieved and maintained at a level that provides a buffer against factors that may impact adversely, like an earthquake, and we've just had another one. The fourth principle is to prudently manage the fiscal risks facing the state. And finally, it's not just about spending, it's about the tax base, pursuing policies that are consistent with a reasonable degree of predictability about the level and stability of tax rates for future years. When we came to Kiev on Friday night, we went to a wonderful restaurant. And two things thrilled me and shocked me. The thing that thrilled me was the quality of the cuisine here is fantastic. Just amazing. But I was told that there is a special tax rate if you're a small business, right? What's it, 5%? So what incentive is that saying to somebody? Don't grow. Don't grow because you're going to hit another tax rate. So what do people do? They game the system. This restaurant probably is owned by 10 people, so it's 10 small micro businesses. That's crazy. You've got great cuisine, you've got wonderful minds, don't write silly rules. First thing. The second thing that shocked me was learning about your agriculture. I'm a farmer. There are no subsidies in New Zealand. We have the most competitive agricultural economy in the world. Here's a confession. I went to the mansion 2 days ago. It was obscene. I turned over the carpet in your disgraced president's bedroom, beautiful carpet, turned it over, and remember he was buying the best. I turned it over, New Zealand wool. Sorry about that. But New Zealand agriculture faces the world. We innovate, we're productive. Your agriculture is not free to operate. And you have a tax regime that is just ludicrous for agriculture. So I'm talking about very, very different rules of the game. And that is the context in which you should be looking at fiscal policy. It's not about the technical rules. They matter. It's not about what's written on paper. It's the way politicians behave. And you know what we did? Because politicians always want to vote themselves rich. And in Ukraine, there's plenty of ways in which they can vote themselves rich. And we wanted to change the behaviour of the politicians. By putting in place the fiscal rules, no credible politician in New Zealand will ever argue for borrowing and deficits as a way to fund their program. That is now verboten. The electorate will not vote for it. 6 weeks before every election, the Ministry of Finance must publish the state of the books, the absolute everything, assets, liabilities, what we're facing, what the books look like. So no politician can campaign on the basis of, I promise you everything, and then when I get into office, oh, sorry about that, I didn't know the books were so bad. It's changing behaviour, not just changing figures. We change the figures. It's changing behaviour. So my plea to you here in Ukraine is not to regard fiscal policy as a dry matter, you just tuck it away, you do some technical change. No. It has to be part of a broader program, the revolution that really matters. You want to make the future for yourselves, you've got to disrupt current practices. You have to understand what constitutes international best practice and apply it at every level of your policy. Monetary policy and fiscal policy. Free up your labour market. Have open and competitive markets. Make the oligarchs face competition. Make the state perform its key role as a protector. Get a decent rule of law. Ensure that when people make a decision to invest and to employ, they can be confident that the rules of the game won't change tomorrow, that you've got a tax regime that invites people to invest. So there it is, Ukraine. This is the revolution that really matters, and I'm here to give you confidence, not just in the technical approach, but confidence that if you are willing to do a comprehensive, game-changing set of reforms, you too could be standing, like I do proudly, far away from my country, but knowing that we're the best in the world in which to do business, we're the most free, the most transparent, the least corrupt, and we needed to do all those things because we live far away. We needed to be so well behaved, so competitive, that we secured the standard of living for the country. And it's in that context that high-quality fiscal policy plays its part. Okay, so don't just talk about it, do it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for this empowering presentation. We just got the notice that the finance minister is still with the prime minister. I think they're discussing what you told them several days before. Yeah, what to do.
I hope it's how to do it.
So we will continue with our panel, and I invite Gleb Wyszynski to present the results of the study, actually, on the effectiveness of public finance.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you very much. Today, I'm in part deputizing for my colleague Masha Ryabko, the initiator of this survey and this conference. She will present in the second session. We'll speak about a special survey that we carried out before the conference to analyze the spendings of the Ministry of Education and Science budget programs. And I would like really to start with how this idea came into being. About a year ago, I think many of you remember it, we had quite a lively discussion, a heated discussion about changes to the fiscal code and the budget. And I think the numbers 3, 3, 5, and 7 still make me wake up at night. And they if you remember, they concern some changes to the fiscal code, to the tax code, and really ambiguous impact on the national budget. And hopefully we got some joint consensus on the need to reduce the social contribution, and we were lucky to have a political decision implementing it finally approved. And you remember when the budget for 2016 was motioned to the Parliament, it saw really a very greatly reduced redistribution of GDP through the budget. At that point in time, we were just a young think tank, and we were really bothered with the topic of cutting short public expenditures, how to manage public expenditures, how can we make the public understand that public expenditures are too big and we are really short on political time to make proper decision to trim them, and how we can really do something radical to change the whole approach and the situation, like we heard in previous speeches. So we were starting moving in this direction, and the budget that was approved and the ideas that were embedded there, I mean the current year budget, they were not ideal, but some principal hints of changes have been inserted there. And Pavlo, my colleague, who sits in the building of the cabinet throughout the day, he knows that some substantial changes have already been made. So the research, back to the survey that we had, it showed that an optimal level of redistribution of GDP through the budget is about 37% of GDP, way more than in New Zealand, but much less than the current 43%, and way less than the amount that we observed from 2010 to 2014. I'm sorry to tell you that we have a bit of mistake in the red circle on this slide. But if you check the economic growth dynamics in Ukraine for this period from 2010 to 2014, you will see that the attempt to raise this dumbbell really had an impact on economic growth. And starting from 2012, from the really anti-national Yanukovych regime, we were able to see quite clearly these things. I think Olena does remember the figure of reduction of budget revenues in 2013. Yes, and if we include here the economic crisis of 2014 and 15, due to huge imbalances accumulated by previous governments and the armed conflict in the East, we will come to an understanding that we didn't really have these 2 years of stability that Yanukovych spoke about. And we had accumulation of public expenditure, and it started from a substantial increase of the so-called social standards of living. A nice tag widely used here. We had the first attempt in 2004, the new government's coming. We had another bout of these increases to the effects of this crisis that we've been facing until now. So why it is important to spend less for more? You can see how the national debt is growing, how rapidly it grows. You can compare it with what Ruth mentioned for the New Zealand situation. You can see how quickly it grows. You can see how quickly it has been growing for the recent time, and related money needed to service the debt increased proportionally. You can see the 10-year lifespan, and you can see how the debt and the amount needed to service the debt grew. You can see that it really stands at 8% of GDP and costs 4.5% of GDP. Another reason why we need to spend less, it is about numerous, as we call them, nation-capturing agents. whenever we make decision whether we spend more or less through the government, we need to remember that we rank just 110th position in Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, and we have huge and powerful groups of interest aimed at seeking rents and pursuing their own interests, vested interests. In terms of capital expenditure, CapEx, you probably know from a variety of media reports on the topic how abysmal the situation is. And you know of the corruption perception in state investment programs, and we see that anyway, because of the low basis or capital basis, the return will be probably more substantial. But anyway, our institutional incapacity does not allow us fully using and spending money as intended. So the reduction of expenditures in 2014 through 2016 was not the result of a reform in public finance management. You can see these changes, you can track it from the table, in proportion of GDP redistributed through respective budget items. You can see the social expenditures, line 3, you can see education, line 4, public health protection, line 5. And if we take, say, public health protection, this is probably the only sector when we have kind of a strategic vision of how the area should be reformed. And some early changes are really expected somewhere in 2017, but attempts to cut the budget in the sector were made much earlier than that. This schematic has some data we obtained throughout our survey. You can check our handouts for that. And if we check x-axis, it will show public expenditures per specific functional categories in percentage of GDP. And the y-axis shows deviation of expenditures per specific budget in proportion to relevant expenditures borne by the EU countries, new EU member states. So let us exclude the defense sector because we have a non-standard situation, but let us see further national debt service, over financing of the judiciary, of the public and underfinanced education, underfinanced public health protection. So if we check some key points that we wanted to focus. So we can see social protection. We see that up to 40% of social benefits have never been verified. We have 48 million of benefit receivers against roughly 40 million of population. And we have 10 million single social contribution payers in the country, and we have 12 million retirees who are actually younger than the statutory retirement age. Meanwhile, 4.5% of retirees have not enough to provide for their need for food. And this is not just our invention. It is the result of a verification exercise carried by the State Statistical Service.
Education. almost 6% of GDP and 13% of public spending. Students in villages, 31%, but the share of rural schools is 67%. It is chronically underfinanced infrastructure, and 80% of graduates enroll in higher educational institutions. In Germany, it's only 65%, for example. Low professional level of teachers because of low level of salaries. Although our children, and the example that we heard from Hesse is very bright speaking, because it's a priority area and there are no options for the secondary education. Almost 100% of children go through the secondary education, so it is a top priority. And 15% of graduates in 2016 were not able to pass the test, math test. And in the villages, only one-third of students successfully passed the external testing exam. The expenditure for healthcare, 8% of public spending and 3% of GDP. We see that we have 1.0 times number of nurses we have 1.0 time more hospital beds and longer time spent in hospitals. And people who need healthcare cannot pay for it compared to the EU. And the indicator of child mortality rate is double compared to EU, and 11 times higher the mortality related to TB. And Ukrainians live 6 years shorter than people in the EU. Law enforcement agencies, it's 6% of public spending and 2% of GDP. We have almost 3 times more police officers and prosecutor officers, and we have almost 2 times more inmates compared to the EU. And all those indicators are for 1,000 population. And 61% don't trust prosecutor offices, and unlawful activities of law enforcement officers is the highest barrier to the investments in Ukraine, and also ineffective anti-corruption work. So what do we suggest? We can see that in different countries, the targeted programs have reduced the public spending. On average, on these countries presented on the slide, we can see the annual reduction by 1.4% of the public spending, and the average duration of reform was 5 years. So we didn't really consider radical examples that Ruth shared, although we like it, but we have really compared the more average examples. So the algorithm that has been used in Canada, the question is whether this reform was done in the interest of society. If yes, then is this the role of the state? If so, then can this be delegated to some non-governmental agency or a business? If that cannot be delegated to NGOs or businesses, can it be delegated to the lower levels? If not, then it should be implemented at the central level. The next question, how can we improve effectiveness? And then, do we have enough spending for that? Then we look at the model of input, output, outcome. We have state inputs, state outputs, the quality and the number of state infrastructure, like the number of schools and so on. And then the outcome is the impact on the life quality of population and trust to the law enforcement agencies and so on. And I thank you for your attention. And in the second session, we will continue the discussion of this based on two specific examples. Thank you, Hlib, and I would like to invite Pavlo. You have the most challenging role today because we have already heard what we need to do, where we need to do this, and you as a person living on the 6th floor of the Cabinet of Ministers, can you tell us whether it is being done or not, and when can we expect the results? Thank you. I hope that the Minister of Finance will finally show up, who will actually respond to all your questions. But I would like to look at the things that have been done and what the outputs that we have. Starting from 2014, we have had the highest, the public spending was half of the GDP, and the second half of the year was the Naftogaz company connected to the subsidies for the population of the gas prices. 2016 showed the problem of Naftogaz was completely resolved, and now the prices are like import parity. Subsidies are technically impossible. We have the state budget 3.7% of GDP, and it's going down, and we have the public spending at the level of 42%. So there is a significant fiscal consolidation, and we have moved ahead significantly, achieved a good progress. 18% of GDP is the... sorry, was this because of effectiveness? I will come to that. Unfortunately, it was not because of effectiveness. We reduced the taxes, but we reduced the tax burden, but we have done it not because of structural reforms, although in part, yeah, it was because of structural reforms like Naftogaz reform, but because of high inflation primarily and non-indexating pensions to inflation rate. So we have kind of significantly reduced the salaries and social standards. And respectively, we haven't done any structural reform. We have not reformed the healthcare, and we have reformed education only superficially, and we have not done a pension reform. We only reduced the social standards. So we have a very high political pressure to raise tax burden, because now we have the effect of this spring going, expanding, and the public spending in the budget of next year has been not balanced. This year we had 42% of GDP. As IMF forecasted, next year we would have 43.5% of GDP. So we have the different trend now, but only now we are starting to do the structural reforms. We finally initiated the reform of public health care. It is the same healthcare system that we had in the 80s in New Zealand, and Ms. Richardson has a very good outline of the actions that they did, and we are trying to do very similar things like public contracting, providing healthcare services, making hospitals more independent. So we are moving in the same direction, but only a quarter of a century later. And our state debt is more than 80%. Most of it is in hard currency, so the problems have not been resolved. And if hryvnia, through some external shocks, goes down because of some earthquake or whatever, we will have, very big problem. We'll have deficits going up and fiscal burden going up. But we have moved ahead, and we are finally implementing a very significant reform of public finance management, along the lines of what we heard from our guest speaker from Germany. We have financed from the EU donors' resources the long-term and the mid-term budgeting, and also connecting the budgeting with the strategic planning. We have revised the taxes and many other things that have been mentioned today. But, first of all, we are only beginning although it should have started back in 2014. And finally, the system has not been reformed. It has serious budgetary limitations. And when people have a lot of protests because of budget limitations. And politically, people are demanding to get more funding. And it's very difficult to resist this. Even Natalia Yarecka, who was probably the toughest Minister of Finance in the history of Ukraine, succeeded only in part. We have the third tax reform every year. We have actually some kind of a tax reform, but it's actually the parts of the same reform that should have happened in one step, but for several reasons it didn't happen, through some resistance and special interest groups, through the lack of capacity to make effective steps, and because of the conflicts between the reformers themselves. In 2014, we had a serious income tax reform, and we had tax decentralization. In 2015, we cut in half the single social tax, and we have started the VAT reimbursement, and we have also reduced the ceiling for the simplified tax system for small businesses, and also reduced the companies going into the gray sector, because now we have different tax ceilings. And this year we have also approved, last week actually, the big tax administration reform law that will put a lot of blocks to the corruption practices, and hopefully it will be voted for even this week in the parliament. And there is a serious progress, and the business is noticing it. This year, today I have seen the interview of one of them, the company leader, but based on the survey, we see that the tax problem remains the biggest for businesses in terms of administration and the tax burden. But in terms of administration and the interaction with the tax authorities and how businesses are experiencing that is a problem. There is also a traditional problem of avoiding tax through offshore by oligarchs and large businesses. There is also a problem of simplified taxation. And it's not only a special system for small businesses, but there are certain gaps that created for they make it an internal offshore. You can create a lot of legal entities that work as single tax small businesses. And so those people who don't use external offshore, they use the internal offshore through this simple tax system. So overall, in all the areas of fiscal policy, we have quite significant progress, but it's a slow progress. It wasn't done in one step, as Ms. Richardson did in her times of service, and when Ivan Miklas did in Slovakia, and other reformers did. And there are many things that should have been done, but they're still, on paper or in the plans and not in real life. And it has to do not only with fiscal area, but with all other Ukrainian reforms. And if you're following them, you will understand that wherever the reforms are happening, they're slow and not complete. And what can we do with that? I think maybe Minister of Finance will eventually come and will tell us. Thank you, Pavlo.
Thank you, Pavlo. I think we'll postpone our coffee break for a couple of seconds just to have a chance to put questions to our speakers, because it is a rare occasion for us to have that brilliant team with us.
Very small question to our guests. I think it's a conceptual question for Ukraine, very important. And when you introduced your changes to the fiscal system, or you introduced a kind of the revolutionary reform in New Zealand and in Germany, you switched to these KPIs, right? Did you have to change legislation, and did you have support of the parliament for this? Take a microphone, please.
Yeah. Can I answer that? Because I think that's very important in the technique of reform. You know, I mean, I get excited by the ideas shared by my friends on the platform. We know what best practice looks like. We know there's a problem with political will. But there are some very good techniques in how to do this. So the Public Finance Act in 1989 went to the Parliament. It was a radical overhaul of the way in which we conducted public sector finances and applied to every ministry. So it was an omnibus piece of legislation that went hand in hand with the state sector reforms that allowed us, when we moved to budget on outputs, we then were able to contract the capacity in the public sector to deliver those outputs. Because it's no use having modern public performance management of financial capital if you can't have modern performance management of human capital. So those two reforms radically changed. Nowhere else in the world was that done. We went to the Parliament. Why? We said, if we want to deal with the problems that has been talked about and we all know afflict many countries, if we're going to get this budget under control and make the state more relevant where it does have a task, we have to have modern systems of managing and accounting for that service. And by having an omnibus piece of legislation, it meant we were able to effectively build the will to reform with a big change. Then we had the technical implementation of that reform. And if I look at Ukraine, where you're wanting to have individual reform units inside some ministries, you having one by one piece of legislation, all of your political will is being used to do something really small and trivial. It's much better to do a big bang, to use up your political will on something that will permanently have a seismic shift. For example, we talked about health. In our state-owned enterprises, we passed a State-Owned Enterprise Act that affected the management and accountability of all publicly owned entities, everyone. Which means you make the vision, you make the case, you say to the Parliament, look, you know, one shot. Last thing, I think at this stage in Ukraine, if I was running Ukraine for a day, and I'd love to do that, then I would have in the President's office, which is where you are, right?
Cabinet of Ministers.
A Cabinet of Ministers, right. In the President's office, I'd have like a SWAT team. So I would go to the Parliament, say to the Prime Minister, you know what to do? Now you go to the Parliament and you convince them to do it. Give me the big game-changing reform, and then have a SWAT unit inside the President's office that project manages across the board. Your problem is you have silos. You know, you got to effort here and effort there, and they're at conflict, and there's no coherence. And is it any wonder you don't get the reform? So that's my advice.
Thank you very much. So reform should be not radical, but also comprehensive. That's the recipe. Yeah. Okay, Mr. Weiland, would you like to add something?
I'm not a political, I'm an office worker, so my answer is very short. Yes, we changed our budget law, and supported by the Parliament.
So you were lucky.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Шановні колеги, ви маєте можливість задати...
Now, dear colleagues, you have your chance of putting questions. Let's make just 5 questions to our speakers. Konstantin Medyanik, Information Agency. My question is to Pavlo. He said that actually no reforms have been carried out and the government only launched inflation mechanism by printing more money. And consequently, if we continue raising salaries to our workers, it will only fasten this inflation mechanism and lead to a further devaluation of hryvnia. From what I understood, at least. You also said that there were efforts to stabilize the fiscal service, state fiscal service. What I'm not entirely clear here is that, whenever we go to Germany or Cyprus, we can see that, say, our VAT is 20%, while they may have 5 to 7%. On some goods, it can be more, like tobacco or strong spirits. Could you please be more specific with your question? I'm interested how we come with that stabilization in the fiscal service, the outcomes of that stabilization, and how it affected the shadow economy. I'm not sure about the fiscal service. We did have the macroeconomic stabilization. We stopped our inflation process, devaluation, and it was not because of printing more bills, but because of eliminating imbalances from previous years. And certain reductions of already bloated public expenditures. So I may not tell you that really. When I spoke of no reforms in specific sectors, I was to mean that we saw no structural changes, say in the public health protection, elsewhere. This also concerns structural subsidies on gas tariffs for the population and attempts to reorganize the Naftogaz. As regards macroeconomic stabilization, yes, we did have it, but speaking of the state fiscal service, we had some reforms in the fiscal system, in the service itself, and some changes have been really. We've seen some changes in the personnel, slight at its best. And definitely these changes are definitely not enough, and business circles tell us this very clearly, that this is by far not enough. Okay, next question, please. Second row, please. Hi, I'm Yevgen Shulha. I'm from Case Ukraine think tank. So my question is to Mr. Valand and probably to Mrs. Richardson. You mentioned some specific indicators to evaluate performance of governments and public authorities. Who is to identify the level of these indicators? Because if we task the ministry with designing such indicators, they will provide as easy as possible example. Other stakeholders may increase these indicators. So how to properly set these indicators to use them as a cornerstone, as a beacon?
From the administration, and yeah, it's not the job from the government, because they sorry for my bad English, but I think the job from the political is to define the targets, the objectives, and the administration are define the indicators. That's a job in Germany for the administration.
Good, very good question. We talked about inputs, outputs, and outcomes. This is the trick. In terms of allocating the money, say take police. If you were budgeting on inputs, you would budget for so many people, so many cars, so many computers. That's irrelevant. If I'm the Minister of Police, I am buying a policing service. I benchmark it. I go to Parliament, if I'm the Minister of Police, ex ante, before, with the budget, to say, please vote me the money These are the outputs. But that's not enough, because it's the outcome, a more secure society. That's why I'm buying police services. And what the government in New Zealand has done on a whole of government basis is to decide the targets that are really important. Increasing child health, for example. Increasing educational attainment. Lowering the level of crime. There are if you look on our website, you can see very specific targets set, as my friend said, at the political level. And what is the accountability? First of all, the architecture makes it really easy for the public to understand, is that policy setting. Don't waste your reform effort on small things. Go for the big bang.
Thanks a lot. We hope this big bang is very...
Дуже дякуємо. Ми сподіваємося, що
Дуже дякую і запрошую вас на каву на 20 хвилин. Організатори нам дозволили трошечки теж затримати.
Thank you. I invite you all to coffee break.
Thank you. You're a very good moderator.
Thank you. You're an excellent.
Sorry for the...
Sorry, I was really impressed.
No, I'm so sorry for too much.
No, it's okay.
Great speech. No, for sorry. It was great speech.
It's okay.
I think what was really
we're going to have a replacement now. Zoriana Chernenko, welcome here, by the way. Instead of Irina Sisoyenko mentioned in the agenda, we are going to have the chief of the panel, Zoriana Chernenko, an expert from the RPR group on public health sector reform. So, please welcome participants of the panel that will discuss the analysis of the budget program of the Ministry for Public Health Protection. We are going to hear first Alexandra Batley, the leading research fellow in the Institute of Economic Research and Political Consultants. And we will hear more comments on that from Pavlo Kovtuniuk, Deputy Minister of Public Health Protection, Zoriana, I already introduced her, and Mr. Mazurchuk, head of the Reform Office and Political Analysis Office with the Parliament of Ukraine. Lots has been said already about the need to efficiently spend the money we really have. Essentially, I'd like to explain why we need to speak about the efficiency of public spendings and the role of the Ministry of Public Health Protection. We will analyze some budget requests from the Ministry, and more details can be found in our reform report. As Gleb has already mentioned, the results, the performance results in the public health protection sector is abysmal. We have high level of infectious diseases, and 50% of Ukrainians refuse outpatient or inpatient treatment because of the lack of funds, and the majority of Ukrainians, furthermore, say they come across substantial difficulties when attempting to pay for their treatment. And we can see that it is about shortages of financing. We can see the total public health costs in percentage to GDP compared with relevant indicators from the EU countries. And if we look at the purchasing power indicator, then the amount will be even less. And even the small cost, the money that we have, we fail to do something efficiently. We mostly finance the structure of ministerial bodies than the medicine itself. We have lots of sectoral treatment facilities that we need to cater. And we have deficiencies in the primary health care. We have a newly developed concept of the reform of the system of public health protection financing, and there are some measures envisaged there. But the problem is not just in spending efficiently, but also about ability to plan expenditures in an efficient way. We have the regulations of the ministry adopted by the cabinet, and if we look in the document, we will see that the ministry is about to tackle a variety of processes, from development of policies to control and oversight of proper use of medications and medical facilities. But generally speaking, we'll see that it is all about processes, not results. And because of that, we definitely see no KPIs involved. and this is understandable in this setting. If we check budget request from the ministry, we'll see standard form number 1, and we see in the document that the ministry must provide affordable and quality medical healthcare. But again, it's just a blank political statement without any specifics as to the health status of the population, etc. If we would check the experience of other countries, we would see that we should include certain specific measures to be implemented to improve the health status of the population, to ensure quality healthcare services, etc. When we try to analyze our budget requests, and the budget request is a document to say what the Ministry of Public Health Protection wants to get money for. I tried to print out this set of budget requests for the coming year. You see that's a whole Bible that nevertheless does not allow you to see how efficiently the funds will be spent by the ministry. The reason for that is, again, we have no clear-cut objectives and we have no related tasks. Meanwhile, there are some 18 public health protection related budget programs that the ministry is the key budget spending entity. And there is also a variety of functions that the ministry has been tasked on top of its direct responsibilities of improving health status of the population. And we should be mindful of it because it's about a very important human capital. So the 18 budget programs the ministry is participant in are hardly if ever related to public health care protection. The only program still more or less official is the one on AIDS and HIV prevention until 18th. And this is the only standing program. The remaining programs are about to end this year. And this means that the funds that the ministry requests will continue being used to finance the process rather than the end objective, end target. And budget requests submitted by the Ministry of Public Health Protection in early September. So say we have the end of our hepatitis and oncological diseases treatment programs ending, and there were no intent to re-establish financing of these. But nevertheless, we are having these requests, and these requests are mostly aimed at current operational cost compensation. If we think about the objective of a measure, then the Ministry of Finance has adopted a set of recommendations and guidelines as to how to design budget programs, budget requests, how to formulate the objective, the tasks, and the indicators, and you can see some of these recommendations here. If we check the budget resolutions of the ministry, they're more or less in line with applicable international experience. And I would like to apologize for the representative of the ministry present here. So it is not us having something against the ministry itself, but because of we decided to take a ministry as an example. And, well, this is one of the silver lines of the greater transparency that we are now started seeing. So we see some objectives related to better implementation of governmental policies of public health protection. We were surprised to see certain steps to be taken by the ministry to enhance qualifications of employees of the national railroad and transportation system, for example. I'm not really clear what the Ministry of Public Health Protection has to do with it. And I can assure you, in business they call it a bonus package. Maybe this is related somehow to that. We also see some other tasks related to specific processes, but without aim or objective. Say, development of something, licensing something, oversight and control, or which are exactly current operational functions of the ministry. And we already heard today that we need to have a clear-cut objective based on political priority and specific steps and tasks developed to support this objective and its reaching. So the most of the problems we see with the ministry's ability to formulate outcomes. There is a language saying that yes, we have to assess the performance of budget programs based on the analysis of performance indicators for such program. And this provides us a better vision of what to change in the program. And the Minfin says that there are specific criteria to be met when working with indicators, like they must be realistic and they must be really for the benefit of the public, etc. Meanwhile, we see here mostly expenditure-related indicators that are not by far performance indicators. Performance indicator must also include savings involved, for example, certain financial considerations behind the tasks, and other aspects that allow us identifying the achieving of the objective and ultimately the performance of the whole program. Another problem is that we have a program, say we have an objective and we have several tasks in the program, and we have a set of indicators that are not related to tasks, that are just general for the program. Again, we are not able to estimate the efficiency of the program. We have no idea how many people have been involved, say, in specific tasks, etc. And these are the things that need to be changed. And here are some of the results that we already have. Say, the number of processed mail correspondence per one employee, for example, and it is about the whole of the ministry staff, not just, say, secretarial support staff dealing with it, how it is related to the performance indicators. We also have a very blank indicator of efficiency of treatment without any regard or concern for specific nosological forms. Another indicator is facilities and floor space rented out. This really puzzles me. If we have higher rented space, is it good or is it bad? Maybe it is good because we have been more efficient and squeezing our own stuff and renting out the remainder, but at least it is a question to be answered. And in terms of public benefit or public importance, whether it is important or not is a question. Also, the number of people who've got the diploma, the academic diploma of junior specialist. It's an interesting thing on the backdrop of the overall shrink in the number of medical personnel. Yet still we have Around 100% of them going as junior specialists with relevant diplomas, and nobody seems to care that they are going to leave to some other sector in search of better prospects. Or take another indicator, the level of extent of repayment of accounts payable. How good or bad is this one? Or the number of Ukrainian citizens in need of treatment abroad, how it is related to expenditures. An indicator needs to be tied to specific resources and ways of spending these resources. And the number of patients in need of treatment overseas is not one. Or take another one, is the number of persons referred to inpatient treatment and the cost per patient, with no idea as to the nosological form and other considerations to see whether it is good or bad to see changes in the per patient cost of treatment. We also need to include the mortality rate, how many of patients died while waiting for the treatment. Our queues are long enough for people to get the medical treatment, etc. Another problem is that our budget requests are generally for 1 year only.
The problem is that analysis for 2015 is submitted based on the analysis of the program implementation from last year. So it doesn't talk about the implementation of the specific indicator. It just says that so many surgeries have been done, and this is even in best case scenario. Often they say this is how much we spent for this area, so much for that area, so there is no evaluation of results. And the lack of midterm planning, especially in healthcare, means that we don't know what's going to be planned, what's going to be funded. And this is what almost happened this year when we forgot to include hepatitis and oncological diseases in the funding cycle. But if we had the midterm plan, and we would see that the program is coming to an end. Let's change something. Let's achieve specific results. So overall, we need to have certain KPIs for the ministry itself. We need to have KPIs for the industry of healthcare. We also need the description of budget programs, of what is being funded, because for most programs we don't know what institutions are funded, whether it's only the Ministry of Health or there is also the Center of Public Health and other agencies. So you can read more details on that in the report. These are the options that we could use for KPI setting in the healthcare, like mortality from non-infectious disease. It could be average life expectancy, but you need to be careful with this indicator because healthcare can impact this indicator only partially, especially in Ukraine, because we have other problems that impact that indicator. That could be comprehensive healthcare index, and recently we published a healthcare index of Ukrainians that was done by the School of Healthcare together with some other partners. And that indicator can also be included. And when we talk about other KPIs that should be used by healthcare, we can use maybe guaranteed healthcare package, approving of protocols of healthcare, creating national blood bank, which is very needed in Ukraine, and also a level of satisfaction by healthcare. And the civil society should be very active in this process. And approval of KPIs for healthcare in Australia shows that Ministry of Healthcare opened a tender, and many organizations participated. And the winner was the organization that developed KPIs for the ministry. And there was a big public discussion with focus groups and roundtables. And as a result, the list of those KPIs have been developed and approved by the government. And we can do this process maybe in not in 1 or 2 meetings. It's a long-term process. And KPIs should be set for the midterm and long-term that means that we need to sit down and review them from time to time. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Sasha. The results of this survey study can be discussed and further published at our website, in our social media, and in the Institute of Public Research and Economic Studies. And we also have a comment from Pavlo. We have the hierarchy of speakers here, so you are the first to speak. Thank you, Sasha, for that presentation. What can I say? I listened to it and I took up the challenge. Yes, everything was justified. The only thing I could say now is the practical side of the matter, to tell you more about the context. I have this opportunity to go deeper into how the things work, behind the scenes of what Sasha told you. And I have been always thinking, while listening to Sasha, about this phrase said by Peter Drucker, or one of those economists, that there is nothing worse than to do something that should not be done very effectively. And this is a statement that is so accurate for the Ministry of Healthcare and maybe for other ministries in relation to this findings. You need to understand that the Ministry of Health, like any other ministry, maybe not any other ministry, I'm not sure about other ministries actually, maybe they have a different reality there and people are happier there, but our Ministry of Health is still a Soviet ministry. It is the same as it was to be during the Soviet times, and it had the same, mission as in Soviet times. It is still existing on the same philosophy, and the budget that is being approved every year, it's been approved historically by inertia. And I can tell you how it has been done this year. And actually this year the management team has changed while the budget requests have been submitted. And one day before I came to the office, and then some people working in the financial department came to me with these 3 piles of papers with several copies, like Sasha showed you, this thick pile of paper. And they were like, we need to sign it as soon as possible. We should have been ready yesterday. We had to submit it to the Ministry of Finance yesterday. And Uliana worked for 2 weeks when that happened. So this is how we submitted the budget request this year. And of course, that shows you, the effectiveness and planning, budget planning. So we have inherited the budget. In 25 years of Ukraine's independence, 22 ministers changed in the Ministry of Health, and every one of them approved the budget. And to be honest with you, there is no time to even think whether we need everything that is included in this budget. And based on my experience, I can tell you that it is very difficult to give a quick evaluation of that, because budget programs are titled with very vague definitions like strengthening, improving of something, But in fact, some deputy minister, some subsidiary company is funded that are printing some, templates, documents, whatever. And even the medical procurement program is called something that you can never guess that they're actually procuring medications. So the practical problem that I'm facing is whether you are coming and doing the reform, or you are trying to understand this budget request and trying to interpret the names of those programs into the understandable language. And we are doing that. But to be honest, this is like an extra, work. This is not our core function, and we are trying to change the whole, philosophy of the healthcare in the state from top to the bottom at the macro level, and then we will try to go down if we have time allocated by the parliament, the government, and God himself, and then we will go deeper to the micro level and analyze each specific program, because it will be so time-consuming looking at the effectiveness of those programs. It was a good example on the medical care abroad. We have such program, and we started to analyze it until we were thinking, why do we send people abroad for treatment? Maybe it's better to treat them in Ukraine. And we realized that for many years we have been spending huge amounts of money, really huge amounts, to treat people like 150, 180 persons this year. There is a longer waiting line, actually, because we were able to find more money. But the whole point is that it's a very short, small number of people that are treated abroad, and the amounts are spent for that are huge. And if you calculate all the money that we spent through all those years, we would be able to have that whole thing organized in Ukraine, transplantation and so on, Red Cross. This is something that we are just trying to catch up as we go. So overall, I agree with all the findings, but in practice, we will focus on top priorities that have to do with reforms. We will introduce the new guaranteed state-guaranteed healthcare package, and the current medical subvention will be transferred into this program. But we see that there should not be any subvention. There should be a state-guaranteed healthcare package that funds guaranteed health services. And we need to set KPIs for those services. And the new program should be then developed effectively without wasting time to repair the old, thing. Pavlo, I have one question right away. We understand that you didn't have a real opportunity to change those budget requests and to shift to the new approach. But coming back to what we discussed during the first session, the political goals, does your team have political goals identified on how the system of healthcare in Ukraine should change? And so those political goals that will determine the sector goals and specific KPIs relating to specific issues in healthcare. Yes, our main goal in the funding would be effectiveness. The healthcare may have other goals, but the priority of funding this sector compared to other sector is a very serious matter, and it's extremely serious matter for Ukraine because healthcare is prioritized. Like in Africa, maybe it is a very low priority for Ukraine. But we decided to focus on effectiveness, and our goal is to build such a public spending system where every penny is creating specific results in health services for specific patients so that we can measure the quality of those services. And when we change the discussion into the specific amounts equaling specific services, then we will come to the second political goal, prioritizing healthcare and expanding funding for healthcare. And this is our plan, and Ministry of Finance is very happy with this plan. Thank you. Okay, let's maybe give the floor to Victor and then Zariana. While we are waiting for the slides, I would like to tell you my morning experience when I was on the way here. When I opened Facebook, I see, the happy news from the Ministry of Finance. And this morning started for me with two things. The first thing, the Winnie the Pooh, and second thing, the Ministry of Finance. So, interesting combination, and this is how it looked. Why I am saying this? Because there are certain issues connected to healthcare. The first thing and the second thing, there is also an opportunity to understand the budgeting process better. I have not answered this question correctly in the view of the Ministry of Finance, so I was quite skeptical. But okay, jokes aside, as previous speakers mentioned, the system should be quite simple and clear. We should have midterm documents, and we have those in Ukraine, 2020 strategy, coalition agreements, government plan, our international commitments and treaties with other countries that outline our commitments. Let's call that KPIs or performance indicators that could be for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, depending on the document, but there are fixed, milestones where we should move. So those are KPIs, and according to those documents, the government, the central executive authorities, the ministries are developing their planning documents where they're setting goals, objectives, tasks, and they develop their development strategies like agriculture development or strategy for healthcare development. And according to this, the sectoral strategies are developed, and then the budgets and action plans are established. And the budget includes budget programs, and there are tasks and KPIs within those, so nothing complicated. So you take strategic indicators, and in the end of the budget program, you also connect the strategy with the current operations, and you understand it's simple. Nothing complicated. And the colleagues from the Ministry of Finance are always ready to help to connect those two things. But for some reason, it doesn't happen from year to year. The question is why? The question is rhetorical. And to answer this question, last year I sent a request to all the ministries. The request was quite simple. It had 3 questions. First, 3 key things: your goal, your objectives, and your KPIs. Have all the ministries responded? No. Most of them responded, like 85% of ministries and agencies responded. And I will quote from some of them. And it's important for you to hear some of the responses. It will show you, what Sasha and Pavlo actually talked about, why we have what we have. And probably today I'm the happiest person of all, because my work for the last 1 year and a half, has proven this situation. And the Ministry of Healthcare shows us.
I will quote. So the tasks have been taken from regulations, and let us try to find KPIs. According to Article 21 of the law on the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine shall govern the work of the ministries and other central bodies of the executives in charge of implementation of national policy in respective areas of state and public life. The observance of the constitutions and the laws of Ukraine, the acts by the President of Ukraine, as relate to the rights and freedoms, human rights and freedoms. Full stop. First Deputy Minister Alexandra Pavlenko. This is the response on KPI inquiry. And I can tell you this is probably the best response you can get. Let us see what the Ministry for Family and Sport has. The information on performance of activities of the ministry, we may respond that this information has never been reflected or documented by any carrier, on any carrier, or was obtained or developed in the process of implementation of the task by the ministry. I'm sorry, I cannot really read this because this is too official and too ridiculous. So, for given reasons, this information may not be provided by the ministry. And again, respectfully yours, Deputy Minister. The Ministry of Culture. The information on performance indicators is not available in the ministry. That's it. Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Quantitatively, the performance indicators of the ministry may not be calculated. And I have such nifty things to keep you smiling for 30 minutes, if not more. So it's really ridiculous. It's ridiculous, the situation we have now, and we need to fight it. We need to fight the destruction, and Pavlo was really right about many things here. About some things related to the Ministry for Public Health Protection. So we have some information for 2014 and 15. We still have no information for this year. But, you know, by the way, when Alexandra spoke, I was enjoying every second of her speech because it really it came home to many of my ideas. So in 2015, the ministry had 19 budget programs with a total budget of 9.4 billion hryvnias. 9.4 thousand million hryvnias. Please be attentive. Okay, it was the most convenient way for me to put this figure, so if you're not comfortable with the comma, I may assure you that it's about 9.4 billion hryvnias. Of this amount, almost 9% of them were not used, were not spent, really. So 9% of the budget of the ministry were never used. And these are the amounts from the general national budget. It's not about any special budget allocation. So more than 500,000 not spent. There are some bigger programs there, like the one on maternity, central maternity and children's hospital and some others, but again, if we analyze out of 19 programs, not a single one had analysis of its relevant performance indicators. Not a single program. If you check the budget program Passport, you will see empty lines behind the heading Analysis of Performance Indicators. And it speaks for itself. In 6 out of 19 programs, you would never find any comments as to performance, overall progress, any deviations, explanations. And I will show some of the comments that you may find in 11 out of 19 programs. And Pasha, it's not your task to do it. It's about your financial officers to do what they have to do. Your guys are too used to deliver the same results they've been delivering for decades. Because of that, we have budget program passports not yet approved at the end of the year. Going along with these performance myths. Unfortunately, we have no analysis of budget program performance, and by the way, this is in line with applicable recommendations from the Ministry of Finance, because the Ministry of Finance, the chief controlling authority, does not do it itself as well. So you may get offended with these my words, but you won't see such analysis done by the Minfin, by the Audit Chamber, Accounting Chamber of Ukraine, any other institution related to the budget. You will never find any assessment of budget programs and their performance and related indicators by anyone. Check the budget code. We have some nice wording on audits of expenditures at all phases and stages. We have also numerous mentions of the performance indicators analysis to be used to evaluate general efficiency of public spending. Mentioned several times, but never implemented. Coming back to the budget program on treatment of Ukrainian national abroad. 2 million hryvnias were not spent under this program. Why? I will tell you why. It says the amounts earmarked in the national budget would be sufficient to treat 84 patients. That was the official comment from the ministry. Obviously, these 84 were not lucky. The Central Maternity Children Hospital says that they were not able to spend 340 million because of certain lack of capacity to fully implement the intended works. Or take another budget program related effectively to procurement of medical services, medications, and medical equipment. So we took actual indicators posted by the ministries, and I managed to find the planned figures to check for deviations. So my overall conclusion is not more than 47% of performance indicators are being fully achieved. And this is not just in the Ministry of Public Health Protection. Check the Ministry of Defense. 47, Ministry of Education and Science. 47, Ministry for Economy and Trade, a bit more than 50%. Ministry of Finance, same story.
Not supplied. So this is, kind of additional funding schemes. And in order for you to analyze, all the state programs for specific diseases, it was done by like 100%. And when you ask what is 100%, whether all patients receive the medications, no, that means that all the money that were given were completely spent. And now we have a question, what are KPIs for all those programs? First of all, we need to realize the need. And what does it mean for the healthcare? It means how many people we have, how much they need, and what kind of services. We don't have those numbers. And everyone understands in the healthcare system, especially in the management level, that medical statistics is not reliable. It brings us to the dead end. We cannot really, use medical statistics to understand the problems. And I know several organizations that are trying to to come up with the accurate figures of healthcare to calculate the need. Because whether it will be reimbursement and other things, without accurate numbers for the needs, will not be meaningful. We also had a program on reproductive health or transplantation health. And the question is, why did we decide to do those things and not the other things? Do we have really the top priority as reproductive health in Ukraine? Oncology is no longer a priority. Yes, for certain people in the system, it was legal to get additional funding for their, state-owned medical institutions, so for the Academy of Science or etc. And now, because we don't have the guaranteed state package, we don't have privatization. We don't have prioritization of the most important areas for healthcare. So we are doing fire extinguishing, and in September 200 million have been reallocated from the equipment to the treatment abroad, as if everything is resolved with the equipment. So don't we need equipment? Yes, we do. And we don't have the priorities clearly established, and sometimes those decisions are not justified. With regards to other things, interagency cooperation. We have taken the hospitals from the Ministry of Railway, but we still have a lot of overlapping with this interagency responsibilities. There is like a civil healthcare and military healthcare, and we don't understand who has most urgent needs: civil population or combatants. And secondly, duplication of resources between the Ministry of Social Policy and Ministry of Health. There is a psychological rehabilitation that is covered by both ministries, and there are people with disabilities that also receive services from both ministries. And there are other points for this duplication of resources. Next thing I wanted to mention, those 18 programs for like children's healthcare and others, we had quite a few of them that were like, okay, it doesn't matter what you put in, the main thing is to get the funding. And that was like a challenge of getting the funding. Because we want to do good for people, right? We want to get at least some good from the Ministry of Finance. It was like a game that we played to at least get some funding to help at least some people, and it was from year to year. With regards to reports, yes, we didn't have no public reports, no current, no final reports. Although at every parliamentary committee meetings, we heard some reporting, some abstract reporting that, okay, we are doing a good job. With regards to treatment abroad, this is the issue we have discussed before. Why do people go to Belarus for treatment? Because the Belarusian president didn't want his patients to go abroad, and he said, let's not let people go abroad, let's build our own healthcare system. Why don't we have the same? We had funding allocated for transplantation system, and from year to year the money have been allocated, but we still have not built this coordination center, and there are no liabilities attached. With regards to changes that we need to make for effectiveness, we need to move away from the old approach of reimbursements when we don't buy the medications, but we do the reimbursement. The guaranteed state package instead of subvention, yes, it's a good model. But we need to understand that there should be some priorities set, like oncology, screening. We have central things that should remain with the center, but we also have decentralization that should have the same regional budgets and budgetary programs. And they also have a problem with priority setting. And every region has the same kind of duplication of problems. And we need to to set up recommendations for the regions. And finally, 80 million money are given to the medical university in the budget. Has anyone done the evaluation of how many graduates that receive state scholarship are actually working in the healthcare and not working in the pharmaceutical companies as sales agents? Has anyone evaluated how many of them Ukraine really needs? Why do we give money next year without doing the audit of effectiveness? There are huge amounts, given to this medical university. We are allocating the funding without doing effectiveness assessment. But as a positive note, I would like to say it's a good thing that we are discussing this, not in the context of people are dying and you don't give us the money. The thing is that everyone should understand that the money is given in a transparent manner and people are having responsibilities specifically defined. Thank you, Zariana, and I would like to ask Sergei Marchenko, Deputy Finance Minister, to take the seat here because our next panel will have some questions, and maybe Sergei will want to respond to some questions on behalf of the Ministry of Finance. And now I'd like to give the floor to Igor Shumila, and then we will move to the next session on the education. I would like to use this opportunity of having the Deputy Minister of Health with us. But when he left, I told him my proposal, and I would like to tell you what I said, because he said it was a good idea, and maybe I'm not the only one who has this idea. I think that it would be more useful to continue our work and our discussion by preparing the expert and research community and the experts in the Ministry of Health, and do this ministry with a high-quality budget program that would be in line with the criteria established by the Ministry of Finance, that would give very clear goals and very clear objectives and all other indicators. It would be then a good example for other ministries. And trust me, as a former official working in the Ministry of Economy, I know that every ministry has some qualified professionals that really understand strategic planning. And with the help of the experts that in this room, we can prepare such a budget program, and it will help all other ministries to do the same. And the Deputy Minister said very well that we will do this, and we will actually try to do this. And I trust that it will happen. But I have a question to the participants. Almost all Ukrainian experts are using one indicator, KPI. And the experts from Canada, Germany, and New Zealand, and other countries, they're using the whole range of indicators for political goals, for sectoral goals, performance indicators. Yes, they're using service performance indicators. So, should we only use one indicator, this KPI, that relates to business, instead of using the best practices, best international practices? Second question, why don't we hear from any experts here from both the research institutions and the government that for the several months now already we have developed Millennium Goals 2015 plus that uses international experience and applies them to Ukraine for all sectors, including healthcare, and has worked on the strategic and the sectoral goals. And Lena Bilan has mentioned that already, but she didn't really elaborate on that. She mentioned that, can we do the public finance reform without public administration reform? Public administration reform, because truly we have to start not from the regulations on the ministry that are like Soviet types, but with a clear definition of mission and tasks for every ministry. And everything should follow from that, budget, expenditure, and so on. Thank you. We had a question in the audience. We are a little bit behind the schedule, so we need to move quickly. Vitaly Knyazhensky, Dень newspaper. I have a brief question. It was nice to hear the dialogue between the ministers of health and self-criticism, but I don't really understand why haven't you really specified the goal of the ministry that should be easily determined. I think your main goal should be extending the lifespan of people and reducing mortality rate. Why have you not mentioned that? You have kind of missed that point. 4 of you have spoken, and I would like to say how people pursue the reform of healthcare. This is shortening of hospital beds, reducing the number of hospital beds. In Kiev, that didn't happen yet, and we have the pandemic of flu. And yesterday, a 1-year-old baby had to be placed into the hospital, and there was no space in any hospital. So you mean that the program was not really implemented, but there is already a shortage of hospital beds? First of all, I said that a goal of the Ministry of Health should be improving the health of people, meaning expanding the lifespan of people. And to say it specifically, you need to really have the specific KPIs. And the presentation, my presentation mentioned that we should have financial KPIs and performance KPIs. This is what Mr. Hunter was saying this morning. So KPIs are not just one indicator or one, it's a universal name. This is what Victor explained. We see that there is a demand for very clear and specific KPIs in healthcare, and not only healthcare. And 2 words to Zariana. I just wanted to say that this is a faulty, view. And for this year, we don't have any reduction or shortage of hospital beds. And this is not true. What people are saying and the rumors they're spreading, they're not accurate and not true. And the question of effective administration and logistics, that has to be with the local communal authorities. And if you have any questions to your local authorities that should really ensure the effectiveness of the local hospitals, you should talk to them. The Ministry of Healthcare is ensuring general administration and financial administration. So local hospitals is the problem of local authorities. Thank you. And now I would like to give the floor to next panel speakers. Sergei will stay, and Sergei will have the general comment after the second panel. And now I would like to invite Maria Rybko, the Deputy Director of the Center of Economic Strategy, Yegor Stadny, I've seen him somewhere. He should be here. He is an analyst of SEDOS Center, Volodymyr Bakhrushin, expert on education policy of reanimation package of reforms.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we are not going to have Vice Prime Minister Vladimir Kovtunets, as we are not going to have some high dignitaries from the Ministry of Education and Science, not because we failed to seek their attention. Together with my colleagues, I did monitor a fortnight-long attempt to provide for decent representation of the Ministry for Education and Science and the Ministry of Public Health Protection, and probably this is an indication of their real attitude at the Ministry to the reform attempts in them. But anyway, the floor is now to the panelists. Generally, we did what Alexander rapidly did for the Ministry for Public Health Protection, and we did almost the same to the Ministry for Education and Science. And before going to the presentation, I'd like to tell you that I will repeat actually the words by Ruth, because they correlate with our findings to show that ministries fail to efficiently perform their own functions. And this is true also for the Ministry for Education and Science. We've inherited lots of budget programs that no one is able to deal with, and it's just a huge waste of resources and human resources as well. And it's really of no use speaking about their performance and efficiency, because no one spent enough time and effort to implement them anyway. And here are some of the results shown by Gleb Wyszynski. We see underperforming students in maths. We have ailing secondary education in rural regions. We had problems with universities, almost not a single of them having high international ratings. And we try to use the Canadian algorithm to go through the budget programs of the ministry. We took actually 4 or 5 programs as most representational one to verify whether the algorithm will work in Ukraine and for Ukraine. And I think it can be used in Ukraine, this algorithm. So we took the program on general management and administration in the area of education and science. The key aspects of the Canadian algorithm, may I remind you, is to ascertain whether it is in the interests of the society and the public, whether it is the state function, can it be transferred to some other implementer, also to non-governmental institution to improve the spending and the performance. That is, what we want from the state is to be more caring about the money collected from its residents. So going back to general management and administration, the objective is a bit a bureaucratic language. It's very cumbersome and not palatable, really, and to the fact that you may really not understand. It says about assuring the formation and implementation of national policy in the areas of education and science, scientific, technical and innovation activities, transfer of technologies, preliminary review of candidatures to state prizes of Ukraine in the area of science and technical development, annual prizes for the president, for young scientists, etc., etc. So it's questionable whether those deliberations on who will receive some prizes, national prizes, will be of relevance for other education measures. or take the national policy on education and science. It's a very important function and important for the society one, and it may not be delegated to anyone. And the outcome will be definitely different for education and for science. If we look for the review of candidates to prizes as prizes for young scientists, etc., it is also about some grants and scholarships to be assigned, and I think these should be viably transferred to a specific program maybe, and generally it is a question of why do we need to have that many prizes and grants and scholarships. Maybe we need to understand that if it is done so that we are able to retain these young brains without having them to leave for other countries. And from here, we need to reflect specific tasks and some indicators for that. So the ministry should really delegate some of its functions to the lower tier institutions, retaining the controlling function for itself. I'm not sure, maybe it's for the ministry to decide, but at the very least they need to decide whether they really need this. Or take the transportation costs for students and certain discounts to be introduced via the ministry, and scholarships payable to university students. The so-called social scholarship, Sergei just returned from a meeting on that. So this is just a monetization of certain benefit. So we have already some monetization effort. Why do we need another program, budget program from the ministry on certain transportation cost discounts for given groups of students? And we probably need to introduce differentiated scholarships depending on the location of the place of residence, maybe, or take a program on qualifications upgrades for scientific and pedagogical employees, lead managers and professionals in food processing industry, agro-industrial complex, medical and pharmaceutical professionals. Again, the question is it really the task and the objective for the ministry? Maybe this program should be transformed into qualifications upgrade for teachers. It would be comprehensible for the public, because everyone needs a nice teacher to teach his or her kid. And we would really need that to save on our extra efforts to find better education prospects. But here, you know, qualifications upgrades for specific categories of employees, say from the agro-industrial complex or food processing industry, I think it could be viably done through private funds without involving the state. And going to the input-output outcome model that we used here as well, we need to analyze resources to compare program variants and to see possibilities for savings. In terms of resource analysis, the results are more or less satisfactory, but there are still possibilities of for improvement. Say the resources show no state or public request for analysis of performance, and it is not entirely clear how such efforts to analyze possibilities of saving money, how these should be financed. I think some of research done in this area may be useful for the ministry as a resource to fine-tune its educational policy in the right direction. We often see cases when resource analysis is mixed with product analysis. We see among resources the number of meetings, conferences, summer camps, whatever, business trips. Meanwhile, this is the product, not the resource. As Alexandra has already mentioned it, we oftentimes see among resources, say, floor space considerations or the number of employees, not employees, but the number of employees. For someone interested in monitoring how public funds are used and what is the end result of such expenditures, it might be necessary to have a specific resource dedicated to monitor performance of programs and efficiency of such programs. Because really, if you want to see results and be able to monitor it in real time, we need some resource. And maybe such a unit or some resource like this could be established. Or we'll take this example of analysis, resource analysis of an ideal program of research, scientific research on Antarctic polar station of academic Vernadsky. And we could see all sorts of expenditure from publishing materials to compensation of fuel, say, costs for vessels, etc. So you can see all the breakdown, detailed breakdown of all costs involved, but not every program has it. In terms of product analysis, we need to estimate, to analyze the resource spending capacity to see how efficiently these have been spent. And we need to ascertain whether the product is enough to achieve the result. And we need to finally reflect the end product, not internal processes leading to it. The number of meetings, sessions held, the number of documents adopted, the number of researches, the floor space rented out, processing of librarian fund, and the number of people, listeners attending some trainings. It's again about certain processes. It's not the end result, and it says nothing about the expected outcomes for the public. Some programs do have mentions of end product, like the number of students trained or the number of postgraduate students. So at times we do see it, but there's a way to go, And like with the Ministry of Public Health Protection, there are unit costs involved. For some researchers, it may not be relevant. Say, physical research may cost way more than pedagogical surveys, and so on. So there are some generalizations of that. In terms of outcome analysis, we have problems like everywhere with this. The ministry has good possibilities and capacities to report on performance of the ministry and performance of the programs. You can find some indicators on them in their materials on the website, but we see no such indicators in their budget programs. And because of that, we have some funny indicators like specific cost of decisions made by relevant council or specific weight of orders and or commissions issued. The unit cost of the Svit newspaper published by the ministry, the specific weight of university graduates who've landed the first employment, the level of violations are eliminated during inspections. The proportion ratio of certified students, those who receive diplomas, again, we see here almost 100%. This is what Günther mentioned about Germany. They have the indicator of having as much as possible certified secondary school pupils, for example. We are way more progressive than Germany. We already have 100% coverage with diploma, if you see. So seriously speaking, with problems with finances, it is next to impossible to go on with reforms. The inherited budgets and budgetary programs effectively prevent the whole sector from moving forward and prevent it from freeing funds for something meaningful. And again, it is also necessary to find resources to support expert involvement, analytical efforts, to have some statistical data collection, and it's necessary to speak to the public, to the community, and it is necessary to have political will in the ministry to do something.
А восени 2017-го ми знову такого, там же ж треба щось зробити. Насправді поки що є час.
We still have time. We still have time. And we have talked to donors, to GIZ, to Euro-Union and many others, and the donors expressed their key interest in seeing the fiscal discipline improved in Ukraine. So what I want to tell that there are professionals and experts willing to contribute and to help, and there are some financial resources, and we still have a bit of time to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Masha. Truly, it's interesting that presentation of Mr. Weiland presented that the educational program had a very clear combination of things that are related, like we have a problem with demographics, we have reduced the number of children in schools, but we are not reducing the funding because it's our political strategic priority. And in our discussion on the system of education, when we looked at some demographic indicators, we see that this is something that just came about recently in the discussion of the new government. And now I would like to invite Volodymyr. Your comment on the presentation from the Ministry of Education. I've prepared more to comment on the report with regards to the general discussion topic. I'd like to say that I support the systems that have been said, and I teach that also at my classes, because that has been done for many years. Yes, we do have serious problems on how the Ministry of Healthcare has indicated that has been done formally, very just as a formality for many years, and that's why we have such poor results. I can say that about 6 months ago, when students started to comment online, we received quite a few interesting comments. And I can give you one of such examples. The number of people that participated in the external testing and received a good result, 100% was a target and 100% was performance. And we had quite a few of such indicators. They're quite useless. And we have lots of problems like this. And Günther rightfully said that educational goals should be top priority, political goals. And in the latest discussions on the financing of education, we we said that we need to save because we are overspending. We spend too much on education, and we are comparing it in the percentage of GDP. And when we take this in absolute figures, we will see that on all levels of education, we have reduced costs we have spending 2.5 smaller than Belarus, and several times smaller than our neighbors, Hungary and Baltic countries. And even if we reduce the number of our students from 80% to 20%, still the average indicator globally is 32%. In former Soviet countries, it's over 60% of students going to the universities. So we need to understand that we don't want to have a raw materials-based economy, but we want to build a research-based, productive, innovative economy. And for that, we don't need to think about spending, about cost cutting, but about increasing GDP and increasing funding of education, respectively. And two small comments about the terms that we are using. I'm not going to repeat. We said that effectiveness is like a mythological indicator in Ukraine, and when we talk about effectiveness, we mean a result, or we mean some costs, and very rarely we compare costs and results. Like the cost-benefit analysis is not done, and that also has to do with optimization, that we use this word a lot, and we forget that optimization means that we need to set a goal. It's the first step, and then having the resources at hand, we can see how our resources can be used in the most optimum way to reach the target, to reach this goal that we have set for ourselves. And when we talk about optimization, we don't have any indicators, any goals or targets in mind. Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Yesterday, when I read the report, I had this sense of hope that the Ministry of Education will respond to this report somehow. And I'm happy when someone is trying to kind of intensify the discussion about the results of our educational institutions. But here I would like to touch on the practical side of this matter, because we work with the numbers and figures that are used as the KPI set, that are used for KPI setting. And a year ago, when we started to model some alternative state contracting, it's not, abolishing of state funding. It's just moving to the funding of higher education according to performance-based funding. And we faced a serious challenge that the indicators that are collected in this sector are either process indicators or result indicators that are not, reliable, that people don't trust. And this lack of trust has been discussed for several years already, that people don't trust anybody, and it's one of the key problems that should be resolved. Because if we collect indicators from higher educational institutions, and I'm going to focus on higher education specifically, There is nothing surprising that 100% of graduates are employed, and it's not surprising that everyone can, imitate things and play this game of pretension. And it doesn't start with the office of the dean. It starts in the relationship between the students and the faculty members. And those who ask the faculty members to write reports, they kind of stimulate that imitation. And then they produce their own imitation. And 2 years ago, a big percentage of reports has been abolished at the central level, but our universities are still using a lot of this mandatory reporting, and they create this workload on the faculty members because they want to kind of protect themselves in case the government will bring back those reporting. And I think the solution should be introducing monitoring systems that are based on external agents, external evaluations that work with universities within or outside. First of all, it's the labor market. And yesterday I read this news on Times Higher Education that British people are launching the pilot to evaluate the salaries of the law graduates, kind of a ranking of how much the graduates of certain education institutions are getting paid. And I realized they are doing this in a very comprehensive manner. And last year, Poland has done the same thing. And 9 EU countries already can show anyone online what salaries the graduates of specific universities or schools are getting after a certain time. It's like 34.5 months. So it's like over the period of 3 years. This is when the graduates are getting like a stable employment. And we have all the conditions to introduce such systems. We have the single database of education. We have other databases. We also have single social tax database, and everyone are identified. So it's ID number, and there is no technological, difficulty to create such process. And this educational database is already synchronized with the Ukrainian railway. So we already have experience of synchronizing databases. And when a student shows this transportation pass with the preferential rate, the databases are used to compare whether the student is in the database. But for the 6 months, we have been kind of thinking through this idea, but we have this impression that no one wants it, and it feels like we are just forcing it on people, and people think that we just want to get the grant for this, but we don't really have a grant secured. We have drafted a project proposal, and we are also discussing with the corporate sector that are willing to give us some IT experts to help. But the Ministry of Education doesn't have a single IT professional. Maybe they have them on paper, but no one is actually working in the Ministry of Education who is a specialist in IT. And we actually have already negotiated with different stakeholders, and we actually discussed this with Sergei, and he liked our idea. We discussed this idea in the parliament. And I have my own assumptions. And one of such assumption is that this database does not belong to the state completely, and Anti-Monopoly Committee has already published this, that Mr. Tabachnik actually has a share of this database, and he wanted to do this to compete with the dean of Kiev Polytechnical Institute, who used to control all the databases before. And I don't really understand whether it's the issue of lobbying or something else, but it's an example of how we could at least introduce one indicator, but there is no one who wants to support and help us in this process. If I have one more minute, I would like to say the second thing. Why don't we ask the students? Why don't we ask students themselves? Because the country of Ukraine has never done a representative national survey of students. And next year, the National Academy of Pedagogical Science has 140 million hryvnias allocated. And if this money is going to be taken away, nothing, serious is going to happen. If all this money are going to go for tender and open competitions, nothing serious will happen. And we have preconditions to create this general national panel to poll students, because the applications are now submitted through internet, and they have login and passwords, and we can use that to poll them when they're becoming students. We need to work offline to have a high response rate, and we need to ensure information security, but there are certain things that need to happen.
Thank you. 1 minute for Serhiy Gontar. And Sergei Marchenko will round up the discussion. Just try to stick to 1 minute. I just wanted to continue where Igor Stadny left, concerning the situation with identifying new KPIs to serve really as indicators to measure quality, performance, and effectiveness. The Ministry for Education this year, for the first time, attempted introducing the principle of money follows the student. And we held our entry campaign to universities exactly to these principles, and some of the students really were followed with specific funds from the budget to support their studies. The question of how much it must be remains, and because of that we addressed the financial administration to seek joint solution of it. We designed, together with the Ministry for Education and Science, a set of standard forms that we distributed among higher education institutions. And we tried to estimate the cost of training one professional of highest qualification level in a university. And there are two methods involved, actually. I think we are not going to go into methods in more detail. I think we would better leave it out because we are really short on time. And I think it's of more importance that we have these calculations, and Sergei, I think, already knows about that. And we are really short on time, believe me. Okay, then I'm done with my comment. Thank you for the invitation. I came late a bit because of having to work out a very tough dialogue with the Ministry for Education and Science on scholarships. You know how hard we have been trying to find a compromise solution, and frankly it was really tough to hold these negotiations because of different positions. But thank you for this invitation. This is a very important event. Unfortunately, we see quite a number of people have already left, but it's nice to see that we still have like-minded people, and we have some money still available. We have applicable policy. Problem is that we still continue using mothballed concepts from 20 years ago, hoping for modern results. As a deputy minister with 6 months experience on this position, I already have some idea of how we interact in the ministry and how we try to solve these problems that we've discussed here as well. Going back to scholarships, I was really threatened a couple of times. I was told never to speak about that because it's a very sensitive matter and students may be enraged. Nevertheless, we didn't pay heed to this advice. The ministry says it's about certain hour policy, but we are fine with this policy, and just not to put it on hold, we try to somehow blackmail the Ministry for Education, because we at the Ministry of Finance are quite able to somehow make the ministry move. But it's not a matter of judging who's right and who's wrong. When we met with students, we also found that we have no rapprochement or some mutual understanding with them as well, because students say we are not happy about going without scholarships. Let them be small, this scholarship, but we would really like everyone receiving that. It's an established tradition that if even 800 hryvnias, but delivered to everyone, this universal equalizing agent is a huge factor. And this allows us training people who come into wider life with the same principle of let us have less, but everyone. We are growing a generation of non-competitives. Then when we ask why populists are winners in all our elections, we need to ask the question ourselves about this financial matters, about public funds management. We are still deeply rooted in this paternalist model, where the state cares, or at least has to care, after everyone. And I think the majority of you understand what I talk about, but unfortunately, the most of the public out there does not understand and is not willing to comprehend it, because people want to have a little comfort zone for everyone. Let it be as little as possible, but for everyone. Let it be in shabby apartments with low-wage employment, but let it be safe for everyone. And we definitely need to change the approach. And because of that, it is a position of principle of the Ministry of Finance that specifically of scholarships for students, there need to be specific limitations imposed, specific cuts, if you want, in terms of overall provision. It should be left for the best of the best, the most performing, the most capable. And actually, it doesn't matter for the state, probably up to this moment in time, who to stimulate, but we need to change it in favor of providing incentive for the best. And we, at the Ministry of Finance, find it very hard to lead this struggle, because At times it becomes dirty, and we know that unions are now actively preparing a huge hullabaloo on that point, and they want to include people from the Ministry for Social Policy in that. But it's a stupid situation. Because when we asked students, we want to increase scholarships, but leave them for the best. Let the best receive 2,000 hryvnia, for example. And we heard, no, let's leave it at 800, but so that everyone receives it. This is ludicrous, actually. And it provides answers to many social questions, also about who is able to manipulate and who really manipulates the public and the young generation, nurturing this scheme of living poorly but being equal. And just to wrap up, I'd like to thank the experts present here for their understanding of this range of problems that we have. It's not a question of do we have 50 million hryvnias to finance scholarships for our students. We do have the money. The question is, why should we pay everyone, even those underperformers? And this closely related also to the transfer of responsibilities to the local level. We try to talk to local mayors. You know, the utility payments at local schools. We need to calculate them for each school in the central ministry. How comes? You, as the local government, needs to deal with it. And it will allow cutting overspendings on that and optimizing spendings. But that's just another very small microscopic example. So the question of PFM and KPIs, it's also about policy, but a bit wider than policy and politics. It's about some educational targets and objectives to be set in terms of how we are going to transform the society. And I think this discussion must be just the beginning of a wider public discussion of how to do, what to do with public finance, how to secure effective and efficient spending, what are the priority lines and directions. And we often hear in response that we fear, public upheavals, and we are going to lose our political ratings, etc. This should not be the case. Some ministries, like the Ministry for Public Health Protection, actively work on their concept of change. But we still have politicians and top executives more concerned with their own image and future than the image and the future of the country and their sector. So we need to really make a breakthrough change in our public and individual consciousness as to how to best use available public funds. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Sergei. You can be secure that everyone who has attended this event will continue in this line. And I'd like to thank everyone who have participated, and thank you. Let's keep in touch.
Маша.